The time for silence is over.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation.
I wonder if you know that I know he's lying right now.
Round one, fight.
Meantime, last night the House approved another stimulus package totaling $3 trillion.
We're here talking about Speaker Pelosi's $3 trillion socialist giveaway plan.
The $3 trillion HEROES Act includes aid for local and state governments, the Postal Service, plus another round of stimulus payments and hazard pay for essential workers.
That new aid bill faces an uphill battle in the Senate and here at the White House, where officials have dismissed it as a non-starter and threatened a presidential veto.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
The resolution is adopted.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation in an effort to advance their extreme left-wing agenda.
Oh my God. Stop fucking lying.
The House passed a bill in May, and the Senate went on vacation.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation.
I mean, you just don't do that. You negotiate. Senator, it is a national crisis.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation.
Always lying to me. You're lying so much.
Round two,
The
fight.
House is scheduled to vote today on the Democrats' $2.2 trillion coronavirus relief package.
Elon, how much of a further hurdle are Mitch McConnell and the president?
Mitch McConnell seems to be sort of washing his hands of this affair for now.
This Democrat-controlled House has approved this package, but of course the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. They're expected to vote it down.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation.
I'ma keep on lying to you. Yeah. Until you think it's the truth. Yeah.
Final round, fight.
It may be too little, and it's certainly late. With long lines at food banks across the country and another 885,000 Americans filing for unemployment within just the last week.
You know what I wanna know.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Trump was met with mixed reaction in Congress. It was mostly Republicans, not Democrats, who opposed higher stimulus payments.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Hello and welcome everybody. This is episode 10 of season 2 of The Left Speaks. My name is Chris. I will be your host. Today is March the 14th, 2021, approximately 2 months and 2 weeks removed from the insurrection attempting to overthrow constitutionally mandated presidential elections as incited by Donald Trump. I see we have a few folks in here. Welcome, Ricky. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. Smite Knight as well, and of course our moderator Dash Mickey. Thank you all so far for joining. Today we're going to dive into the COVID relief plan that was recently passed by Democrats after Republicans failed multiple times to pass one, to even suggest one under the Republican-led Senate formerly led by Mitch McConnell. We're also going to dive into Republican complaints about that plan, their response or attempted rebuttal of that plan, and what they covered over the last week and a half or so, instead of actually trying to form some sort of alternative plan for COVID stimulus. You know, instead of actually attempting to govern, we're going to go into what they actually did. I'm going to warn you, it's not very pretty. We're also going to go into some of the potential issues with the COVID relief plan, what alternative states, what alternative nations around the world have done, as opposed to what little we have done. And then we're going to compare our COVID response under the Republican administration and the current Democratic administration. We're going to start with President Biden after signing the COVID relief bill.
Because what you all did with it and the refinements you made, it directly addressed the emergency in this country. Because it focuses on what people need most. Debbie and I often talked about, you got to tell people in plain, simple, straightforward language what it is you're doing to help. You've got to be able to tell a story. Tell the story of what you're about to do and why it matters. Because it's going to make a difference in the lives of millions of people in very concrete, specific ways. This legislation, as everybody's already mentioned, will provide $1,400 in direct payments, which we all promised. Well, that means for a typical family of four, a middle-class family, husband and wife working, making $110,000 a year, that means $5,600 check they're going to get. 85% of the households in America will be getting this money. And a lot of you know, because of the way you came up like I did and others, what that can mean. Think of the millions of people going to sleep at night staring at the ceiling thinking, my God, what am I going to do tomorrow? Lost my health care, don't have a job. Unemployment runs out. I'm behind on my mortgage. What are we going to do? Well, guess what? They're going to be getting that check soon, either by direct deposit or a check from the Treasury. And some are going to get it as early as this weekend. This legislation provides resources needed to open our schools. How many of you have dealt, not only in your own home and with your children and grandchildren, if you have them, with how difficult it is, the mental pressure and stress that are on so many families, so many people needing help if they had access to counseling, because it's caused an enormous stress. This legislation extends unemployment insurance by $300 a week until September. It's going to help 11 million Americans who were days from losing that benefit. This legislation includes the biggest investment in child care since World War II. That's not hyperbole, that's just a fact. It's a fact. It provides help for small businesses to stay open. And 400,000, so many have had to close because the first time around you all worked and did a great piece of work in the House passing significant legislation. What's the first thing the last president did? He fired the folks who were supposed to watch and make sure it got, in fact, distributed the way it was supposed to. We find out so much of it went to people who didn't need it. You all took care of that. It extends coverage and lowers health care costs for so many Americans. So many Americans, and it's a big number for people. It provides for food and nutrition because people knew, and you all were out there handing out food like many of us were, but you saw people who were in car lines that were literally miles long. You'd see 4 lanes of cars that went back for half a mile each just to get a box of food. Again, through no fault of their own. It's going to help people keep a roof over their heads. 500,000 haven't been able to make their mortgage payments. About to be thrown out of their apartments. They have to make up all that they owe. And those mom and pop realtors are in real trouble. It's going to cut child poverty in half I've talked to so many of you. Rosa, you and I have spent so much time on this. But you guys, you, Patty, and others are the ones who have been leading this for so long. And it's finally coming to fruition. and the American people understand it.
From Smite Knight, does he really think that the joint income is over 100,000 average in America? I don't know, but I think the larger point is that it affects 85% of American households. His goal was to hit the vast majority of America with some sort of stimulus. I think everybody can agree, regardless of the political spectrum you may be on, and I know you're typically a little bit further left than I am, Smite, if I'm not mistaken in that. Everybody was hit economically by this pandemic. The pandemic, as we'll show in a minute, seems to be winding down a little bit. The curve seems to be trending downwards. We're getting vaccinations out. I think we're pushing almost 3 million vaccinations a day now in the United States of America. The next big hurdle that we have to fight is not letting the economy grind to a complete halt. As President Biden pointed out, the previous original stimulus was essentially hijacked. You had a lot of large corporations that were filing for stimulus money and a lot of fraudulent smaller folks filing for stimulus money and receiving stimulus money to, run their business when they didn't even actually have a business or they had the cash reserves to protect themselves. A lot of these things, and the typical Republican argument right now is that it's just a big socialist giveaway program and none of it really ties back directly to COVID. A lot of these things do tie directly back to COVID, specifically helping the economy recover from the extended shutdowns we had to go through related to COVID. Childcare support helps people get back to work. Money for childcare agencies or for people providing childcare helps those places stay open when a lot of children haven't been going to daycares currently, either because the parents are at home and not working, or because the parents found the best way they could to keep their children out of large groups. I know my significant other and I, did that personally. Our 5-year-old was going to daycare. He is no longer going to daycare. I still want that daycare facility open when everybody goes back to work. I maintained my work status throughout all of this. My significant other did not. Small businesses, restaurants specifically, were extremely hard hit during this pandemic. I believe there's 25 billion, but we'll cite the exact number here shortly, that goes over, dedicated specifically to small business or to restaurants. From Smite Night, it's winding down, but my God, every Republican governor is trying to challenge that thought. I guess Dems too, if we include California. I completely agree with you. Everybody's in a race right now to be the first one to reopen, it seems like. Though there are several states that are saying, hold on, it's way too premature. To a certain extent, I'm okay with reopening. However, with Texas and Mississippi removing mask mandates, I think that's completely idiotic. If the mask hadn't been politicized to the extent that they were under the previous administration, aka Donald Trump, I don't think we would be seeing that pushback against masks. We're into science and reality denial territory here now. We're not dealing with facts. Back to President Biden for a minute.
It pays for many of the steps we've taken to vaccinate Americans. We're going to be in a position where, because of what you all did in the past, we had the money to go out and literally purchased hundreds of millions of vaccines and then go out and make sure we had enough vaccinators. Vaccines, one thing, to get the vaccine in a vial, out of that vial and into a needle and needle into someone's arm, took tens of thousands of people. And because of you, we were able to mobilize the military. We were able to mobilize FEMA. I was able, by executive order, to allow former docs and nurses to come back and be able to engage in this activity. And one of the things that we said in the beginning that no one thought that I was being straight about was, I said, this is going to create, we have to spend this money to make sure we have economic growth, unrelated to how much it's going to help people. Well, guess what? Every single major economist out there, left, right, and center, supported this plan. Even Wall Street agreed. According to Moody's, for example, by the end of this year, this law alone will create 7 million new jobs. 7 million. And the bill does one more thing, which I think is really important. It changes the paradigm. For the first time in a long time, this bill puts working people in this nation first. It's not hyperbole, it's a fact. For too long, it's been the folks at the top. They're not bad folks. A significant number of them know they shouldn't be getting the tax breaks they had. But it put the richest Americans first who benefited the most. And the theory was, we've all heard it, and especially the last 15 years, the theory was cut taxes and those at the top and the benefits they get will trickle down to everyone. Well, you saw what trickle down does. We've known it for a long time, but this is the first time we've been able to, since the Johnson administration, and maybe even before that, to begin to change the paradigm. We've seen time and time again that that trickle down does not work. And by the way, we don't have anything against wealthy people. You got a great idea, you're going to go out and make millions of dollars. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But guess what? You got to pay your fair share. You got to pay some, because guess what? Folks who are living on the edge, they're paying. And so, again, all it's done is make those at the top richer in the past and everyone else falling behind. This time, it's time that we build an economy that grows from the bottom up and the middle out. The middle out. And this bill shows that when you do that, everybody does better. The wealthy do better. Everybody does better across the board.
So even though Biden is a lot more centrist than I personally am, and even though we didn't get the minimum wage tied in with this Reconciliation Act that passed Biden's COVID Relief Act, I think we can all agree that it's a good thing that he's calling out trickle-down economics as bullshit. We've known it hasn't worked consistently since about 10 years after Reagan started advocating for it. We had the data. If you take a Democratic administration and you take a Republican administration and you pick the same time frames, doesn't matter whether you start a year before or a year after or 2 years after their administration ends, the Democratic administration always grows the economy better. Because when the people at the top have all the money, the people at the bottom have nothing to spend. So nothing sells. Smite Night, is anybody else having a playback issue? I think it's on my end right now. I seem to be having some connection issues with the internet. I do not know exactly what is going on, but it's not something I can fix on the fly. I apologize. My bet is Cox is having problems. They were having problems earlier during the week. Yeah, it's still showing us minor issues on my end. I apologize for that. So let's dive into some reviews of this overall plan. Fairly nonpartisan source here, though a lot of conservatives will disagree, so we'll get to a conservative response here in a minute, but this is from NPR. Showing that the Senate approved it, sent it back to the House, and President Biden signed on Thursday. $1.9 trillion, known as the American Rescue Plan Act, allocates money for vaccines, schools, small businesses, and anti-poverty programs such as an expanded child tax credit. Okay. One of the Republican arguments was that they were effectively shut out of the process through reconciliation, basically the means through which it was passed. They weren't able to filibuster it. They weren't able to stop it from even being heard on the Senate floor. It actually went to a vote, and the Senate had to do their job and actually vote on the damn thing. And surprise, surprise, when that happened, the majority won and it passed. That's the short version of what they're complaining about there. Don't let them deceive you. They have used budget reconciliation, this same maneuver, multiple times to accomplish what they wanted under the previous Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. This is Republicans crying foul about something they have already done before once again. In other words, it's bullshit. Secondly, they're saying only 9% of the funds go directly towards COVID-19 relief. Therefore, the package is too broad. Now, as the intro video showed, Democrats have sent up multiple packages, 3 separate times. Republicans finally managed to provide one that provided $600 checks, which every American, right, left, and center, knew was absurd. This is also misleading because we're talking about directly toward COVID-19 relief, when this plan is also supposed to address the overall economy and getting it back on its feet. And that's the Democratic argument. The bill takes a holistic look at the American economy and how it has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. 2 pieces to this bill. One is directly related to the health crisis, but the larger piece is related to the economic crisis that the health crisis has created. So this is pretty simple to put it in a simplified analogy. If your house where you live caught fire and the fire department came out and put out the fire and put the water directly on the flames, the Republicans are saying that's okay. But if your insurance company gave you any money to rebuild after the fire, to rebuild the home that the fire destroyed, that's not okay. That's going too far. So we'll put out the flames after you hammer us 3 times and we don't provide any single response. But your burned down house, your economy that's in a wreck, you're on your own, which is the typical Republican answer. Now, if you're like me and you like small businesses and don't want to see big, massive corporations controlling everything, and you want to see average American workers get back to work, because that's the majority of people in this country, then you're on your own as an answer simply isn't good enough. So let's go into what it covers. A third of it is stimulus. Money directly into, as President Biden said, 85% of American families. People who lost jobs, people who didn't lose jobs, people who had reduced income, people who owned a business but had to shutter that business, like restaurant owners. People who had 2 people working in the household and dropped down to 1 person, like myself. Money directly into the hands of those Americans. Now, we already know that putting money directly in the hands of most Americans stimulates the economy. Jesus Christ, I'm having internet issues. I apologize. I'm going to have to call Cox after this is over and scream at him. And then I'll upload the whole video to YouTube later since it's being recorded. We already know this works. It's not purely a Democratic answer. We've seen this happen multiple times throughout multiple different administrations. George Bush did it post 9/11 to get people spending money and to keep the economy rolling. Remember after 9/11 when people were asking, what can we do to support this country? And George Bush told everybody to go out and spend money and buy stuff. So we know average Americans spending money helps the economy. And we know keeping the economy running is extremely important. Unemployment benefits. Federal unemployment insurance payments remain at $300 a week. Well, when there's a lot of people unemployed because of the pandemic, when a lot of businesses shut down or reduced employment because less people were out spending money and doing things, you know, like what happened here in Vegas where I live, where there's not near as many people taking vacations to go sit next to somebody at a card table, and there's not near as many people taking vacations to come out here and party in nightclubs and bars because they don't want to catch a deadly disease and spread a pandemic, get grandma sick. They don't want to do those things. Well, when that staff gets reduced, these people are receiving unemployment money. This doesn't go directly to COVID response, according to Republicans. So this shouldn't be in the bill, according to Republicans. Remember, they're complaining that only 9% of the overall bill goes directly to COVID relief. So the first two things we're talking about here, this doesn't go directly to COVID relief, direct stimulus to Americans, even though you might need it because of the coronavirus. And the unemployment benefits, even though you'd still be working if COVID didn't exist, Republicans are opposed to that too. Child tax credit. Temporarily expand the child tax credit. Temporarily, not permanent. In other words, if you have kids, we're going to give you a tax break for this year. Again, we recognize that families that have dependents, you know, because kids aren't bringing in income, are going to be stretched tighter than families, or excuse me, than individuals who do not have dependents. So it makes sense to help out working families, or at least it does to me. Seems pretty basic and logical. Paycheck Protection Program. Small business loan program allowing nonprofits to apply to make sure they can keep making payroll. In other words, you can take these loans and stimulus grants to make sure you can keep paying your people. So when your small business reopens or business gets back to normal, you still have employees working for you. If Republicans are really fans of small business, like they keep claiming to be, this would seem to be something you would support. But again, remember, they're only okay with 9% of this bill. So obviously, this is out. Education. $128 billion in grants to state educational agencies. 90% of it allocated to local education agencies. Or excuse me, 90%. $39 billion in grants to Higher Education Institute. $15 billion going to child care facilities. This is one of the big things they're complaining about. We'll circle back to that one in a minute. Support for low-income families seems to make sense. A lot of the low-income jobs were the ones, you know, waiters, waitresses, those sorts of things, where people weren't working, and we want to keep people out of low-income situations during the middle of a pandemic. Public health. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, so the CDC is going to get more money to track, administer, and distribute COVID-19 vaccines. More money going towards diagnosing, tracing coronavirus infections, and $2 billion going towards distributing various testing and supplies. So I guess that's the part that Republicans are okay with. Everything prior to that, not interested from the Republican side. Emergency rental assistance seems to make sense to me. We don't want people experiencing homelessness in the middle of a global pandemic. People that are homeless and on the streets are harder to find, harder to vaccinate, harder to administer health care to, already very much ignored by our current system. It would be a bad thing to have more people in that situation. And let's not kid ourselves. It's not like, even if you were a cold, heartless, I'll just go ahead and say it, even if you were a cold, heartless son of a bitch, it's not like a pandemic would stay isolated in a homeless population. If your homeless people are sick, they're still your people, first off. But if you have no sense of morality and empathy, it's not like it's only going to affect the homeless. That guy that you give $2 to, that's dry when you're, roll down your window, you just came in contact with him. If he had COVID, it'd be right back out in the general population again. And even if you're not willing to spare $2, if I give him $2 and he takes that $2 and goes to McDonald's and buys himself a hamburger, well, if you go to lunch later that day, COVID just got into that McDonald's again. So you still need to inoculate, vaccinate your homeless population, and having less of them so that they're easier to provide medical care to and easier to reach, and there's a less large number of people that you have difficulty tracking and getting medical care to, would seem to be a good idea to me. And that's if you have no moral compass whatsoever. Industry support. $25 billion for a new grant program for restaurants and other food and drinking establishments. Considering we forced most of them to go delivery only, that's not directly COVID support, so Republicans are against it. Again, small businesses, I guess you're really on your own, is the Republican message. Don't believe what they're telling you. Look at what they're voting for. Legislation sets aside $5 billion of the total money to be targeted to businesses with less than $500,000 revenue in 2019. So not only do we have $25 billion specifically targeted to the restaurant and bar industry, the food and service industry, which was obviously extremely hard hit by this, but we set aside a chunk of that money specifically to target the smallest of small businesses in the restaurant and food industry. And by we, I mean progressives and Democrats. Transportation sector, $30 billion for transit costs, including payroll and personal protective equipment. Payroll we've already covered. Keeping people employed during the middle of a pandemic so they don't end up homeless and have to fall under this rental assistance program seems like a very good idea to me. Personal protective equipment. Well, when I'm getting on a plane, I don't want to catch COVID from my flight attendant. When I'm hopping on a train, I don't want to catch COVID from the person punching the tickets. But again, not directly related to COVID. So Republicans were opposed to it. $8 billion for airports. Well, if we want airports, when all of this is done, seems to be issues. Oh, it's Twitch specifically, guys? That's good. Yeah, it must be the CIA, Ricky the Great, coming to tell me, gotta keep this message down. If it's Twitch specific, y'all may want to hop over to YouTube. It might be easier to track there. But it is showing on my end, so it's not telling me it's Twitch specific, so I can't speak to that. So the only thing that we've skipped over directly, which again, we're going to circle back to here in a little bit, is the education part. The rest of it, on its face, all seems perfectly reasonable to me. It's all tied into getting vaccines into people's arms, keeping people with a paycheck coming in industries that were affected directly by COVID, providing personal protective equipment to the industries that need to keep functioning. The airports, even if you don't want them when we're all done, how do you think a lot of these vaccines are getting transported? Where do you think a FedEx package goes when it leaves the Pfizer production plant or the Moderna production facility? Do you think somebody just like waves a magic wand and this package of vaccines just magically moves from New York to California? Or do you think it needs to go to an airport, get on a plane at some point? So I can see helping subsidize airline travel by a lot right now. It's been pretty clear so far. Good, I'm glad. And I'm glad to know it's just Twitch having issues. I was worried that it was on my side. So let's go into what Republicans spent the week talking about. Because on its face so far, this plan looks pretty reasonable. Yeah, it's expensive. But we've lost over 500,000 Americans. That's more than we lost in World War II. And we had a pretty expensive bill after the end of World War II as well. I would say it was worth it. So the Republican response. This is the U.S. Constitution and other writings. You're not going to find the Republican response and what they were screaming about for the last week and a half in the U.S. Constitution and other writings. You will find it in Green Eggs and Ham. And I desperately wish I was actually exaggerating.
Not a single Republican voted for the historic $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill passed by the Senate this weekend. In fact, Republicans spent most of the weekend trying to derail it while still whining about Dr. Seuss. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. And not a single Republican joined them in the Senate or in the House. They were too busy doing dumb like this.
Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. I am Sam. I am Sam. Sam I am. Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam I am. You do not like them? Say, so you say. Try them, and you may. Say, I like green eggs and ham. I do. I like them, Sam I am. I do so like green eggs and ham. Thank you, Sam I am.
The Republican Senate, everybody. Thank you, Republican senators, for helping people eat, for helping people stay in their homes, for helping people get vaccines related to COVID. Thank you, Republican senators, for the reading lesson that I give my 5-year-old. Is Green Eggs and Ham the only Dr. Seuss book Republicans are familiar with? They've been using it for years over and over to argue against anything from healthcare to this corporation pulling a few of the books. Green Eggs and Ham is one of the best-selling Dr. Seuss books, which is why they use it, because most parents are familiar with it. It's completely misleading because that's not one of the 6 books that is no longer being published by Dr. Seuss, as I went over last week. They're canceling, or they're choosing not to publish 6 Dr. Seuss books. Only one of those even sold enough in the previous year to have tracking numbers on it. Sold 5,000 copies, give or take. The other 5 books didn't even sell enough for the people who track book sales to have any clue how many they sold. This is a private company, the Dr. Seuss Foundation, essentially, choosing not to publish 6 of his books that weren't selling and that had some racist stuff in them. So instead of risking these books that weren't selling maybe blowing up in their faces later, they chose instead to get rid of the books that weren't selling and not have to worry about the racial stuff later. I have no idea what the Republican answer to this would be. Would they plan to force the Dr. Seuss Foundation to continue to publish these books that nobody is buying? That's my best guess. Nobody canceled it. There weren't riots in the street related to Dr. Seuss. But Dr. Seuss, not an alternative COVID relief plan, is what Republicans have spent the last week and a half on. Not constitutional arguments. Dr. Seuss. Dash Mickey, its main lesson is to try new things and you may like it. How does that connect to anything Republicans are trying to fight for? If anything, it shows that they aren't listening or understanding the context. And then Smite Night, Republicans have so easily slipped back into the minority resistance party of culture wars. I agree entirely, Smite Night. It is completely about keeping people outraged and distracted from what's going on. If you poll on COVID relief and stimulus checks, it's like 80% of Democrats support it, 4 out of 5 independents support it, and 2 out of 5 Republicans support it. It is massively, overwhelmingly popular. The goal, from what I can see, is to keep your conservative base so outraged and so angry that they pay attention to this instead of the fact that their neighbor has been unemployed for a few months and just got evicted, and the federal government, the Republicans that you both voted for, did absolutely nothing to try and keep it from happening. It's purely outrage culture at this point. Like I said, I don't know what they think the answer even is. It's not like there were BLM style protests against Dr. Seuss. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anybody burning down Dr. Seuss, statues or anything. It's a made up controversy. From the Tax Foundation. nifty little graph. Where's the 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act going in terms of billions of dollars? See, about a third of it going to the direct economic impact payments. You can see 350 billion of it going to state and local government aid. Because again, when businesses shut down, that's less taxes circulating locally. Of course, that also includes helping those state and local governments set up vaccination centers and get out the word that the vaccine's available. Expanded unemployment insurance and unemployment insurance tax exemption. We're already over half the bill. This is all related to COVID. Had it not been for COVID, we wouldn't see or be seeing this passed. Transportation and infrastructure, financial services, and other education and labor. Transportation and infrastructure we've already covered. We can see why this is necessary. Expanded child tax credit and earned income tax credit. Again, if you took your kid out of massive group daycare because of COVID and you brought them into your home and found one person that you paid that followed COVID regulations, your child care costs probably went up. Makes sense. Also, if you had 4 mouths to feed and you got unemployed instead of just one, it makes sense that you would need additional money as compared to the sole individual. That's also something that's not permanent, though I would argue that it should be. Expanded premium tax cuts and health benefits for workers. It would seem to me that health benefits would be a pretty good thing to make cheaper right now. Would have been damn nice if they'd have been cheaper about a year ago. Small businesses. We already know half of that's going to the restaurant industry from the previous article. And then another large chunk of it, I think it was about 40% or so, is going to payroll protection for these small businesses. In other words, keeping those workers receiving their paychecks. It's not like the owner gets to stuff it in their pocket. So could somebody please explain to me how exactly this is a liberal wish list? This is a progressive wish list, not related to COVID. Because I'm missing it. Is it in here? And that seems to be the Republican answer. Catch up on chat a little bit. From Smite Night, I am against the idea of state sponsorship of any individual, all statues. However, the image of protesters destroying a Dr. Seuss statue is a comedy I didn't know I needed today. Yeah, I think it would be great. I would just love to see like Antifa tearing down, a Dr. Seuss statue. But apparently that's what Republicans think are going on. Ricky the Great One, a California senator reads Green Eggs and Ham as 1,669,600 Californians are unemployed, 157,000 are homeless, 56,000 grieving families. But rather than lead, reps would rather do these dumbass campaigns. I agree. It is completely absurd. Ricky the Great One got caught by the Streamlabs bot. Dash Mickey can't fight it either. Yeah, Ricky, sorry, you just got canceled, my man. You need to go get outraged about it and read about it on your stream, probably. And let me know when you're streaming next. But yeah, you need to make sure and read about that and put me on blast for doing it. So I'm going to blame the bot, though. It's not my fault. And I'm going to keep y'all all so outraged about that there's just not going to be any new content. And I'm not going to solve any problems or deep dive into anything. We just need to solve why this bot blocked Ricky from saying a bad word. It's ridiculous. So that's about all I have on the COVID stimulus bill. I'm going to start looking at the differences in responses now between former President Trump, former twice impeached President Trump, and President Biden. And maybe explain a brief history of COVID and how we've dealt, or rather not dealt with it in this country. And then go into the shift in the tone and see if that's having any effect. Former President Trump.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. It's all turning. They lost. It's all turning. Think of it. Think of it. And this is their new hoax. 35,000 people on average die each year from the flu. Did anyone know that? 35,000. That's a lot of people. And so far, we have lost nobody to coronavirus in the United States. Nobody. And it doesn't mean we won't, and we are totally prepared. It doesn't mean we won't. But think of it. You hear 35 and 40,000 people, and we've lost nobody, and you wonder the press is in hysteria mode.
That was a year ago, a year and 2 weeks to be more precise. We've lost nobody to coronavirus. Doesn't mean we won't. But hey, with the flu, you know, we lose 35, 40,000 a year. But we're prepared. We're totally prepared. Seems like that didn't age too damn well. Let's look at where we are now. Deaths in the United States, 531,766. Over 500,000. But President Trump saw fit to call this a Democratic hoax. I don't want to quibble over definitions. Hoaxes aren't real. We have 531,766 dead American citizens. COVID may have been a lot of things, but it most certainly was not a hoax. Trump knew this shortly afterwards.
I am officially declaring a national emergency.
So he had to backtrack on his previous statement.
We'd much rather be ahead of the curve than behind it, and that's what we are. Therefore, my administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts.
Two weeks after calling it a hoax. That was almost exactly a year ago today. Oh shit, maybe it's not a Democratic hoax. Maybe we should start trying to take this somewhat seriously. Let's declare a national emergency. Let's start locking down big groups. Let's follow the CDC's recommendations. That was Trump 2 weeks after calling this whole thing a Democratic hoax and saying we were totally prepared.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. The new headline is Trump asks people to go outside. That's dangerous. Here we go. Same old group. You ready? I hope people enjoy the sun. And if it has an impact, that's great. I'm just hearing this, not really for the first time. I mean, there's been a rumor that, a very nice rumor that you go outside in the sun or you have heat and it does have an effect on other viruses. But now we get it from one of the great laboratories of the world, I have to say. Covers a lot more territory than just this. This is probably an easy thing, relatively speaking, for you. I would like you to speak to the medical doctors to see if there's any way that you can apply light and heat to cure, if you could. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. Again, I say maybe you can, maybe you can't. I'm not a doctor, but I'm like a person that has a good, what.
But sir, you're the president.
Deborah, have you ever heard of that, the heat and the light relative to certain viruses? Yes, but relative to this virus?
Not as a treatment. I mean, certainly fever
Yeah.
is a good thing when you have a fever. It helps your body respond.
Deborah, a.k.a. Dr. Burks, have you ever heard of heat and light inside the body? Like taking a mag light and shoving it up your butt as a medical treatment? No, not really. Trump, I'm not a doctor. Clearly, you're not a doctor. Smite Night, Trump suggesting that his UV light inside the body was a joke was probably his most obvious lie, and that's saying something. UV light and injecting disinfectants. Using disinfectants via injection as a medical technique. And my favorite part is when somebody comes in here and tries to excuse it as a joke. The presenter on the stage immediately before Trump was going over the results of a study where they found out that surface disinfectants, like bleach, kill COVID on the surface of desks. So Trump's great response, brilliant idea, was why don't we just take that disinfectant and put it inside the body? UV light kills coronaviruses on surfaces. So why don't we take that UV light, like the sun, and shove it where the sun don't shine. Ricky the Great One, shove light bulbs up your butt, not going to kink shame or anything, but I'm not sure that's going to help the COVID. Exactly. I mean, maybe I'm the only one that's heard the expression where the sun don't shine, but yeah, I mean, that's the expression for a reason, right? Smite Night, I have a good you-know-what. Yeah, exactly. The best brain, right? Ridiculous. But that's where we were. Less than a year ago at this point. After declaring a national emergency and saying we're going to follow the CDC recommendations, we start backtracking on that, telling everybody everything's going to be fine all the time. It'll be over soon. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We've got these great new treatments, like injecting bleach into your body and shoving flashlights where flashlights shouldn't go. If that's your thing, have at it. If you're a consenting adult, I don't care. I'm going to leave that comment alone. Now, Trump wasn't the only one complicit in this. We're going to look at Fox and their coverage, not only of COVID and how they flip-flopped, but also how they covered the potential Ebola outbreak under President Obama. And this will tell you a lot about Fox propaganda.
Scaring the living hell out of people, and I see it again as like, oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax. By the way, this program has always taken the coronavirus seriously, and we've never called the virus a hoax.
Oops.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing. Let me tell you something. This virus should be compared to the flu, because at worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
So all the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality. Without a vaccine, the flu would be far more deadly.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president. And sadly, it seems they care very little for any of the destruction they are leaving in their wake.
We don't have immunity to this virus. It's a new virus. It's a pandemic strain of a virus we haven't seen before.
You know, it's critical we know who has this. We must test for the virus in order to stop the spread of it.
But 5 days before that, you said no big deal.
We're facing an incredibly contagious and dangerous virus that is moving across the world from one hotspot to another.
We kind of laugh at it, but nothing to laugh at here. By the way, this program has always taken the coronavirus seriously, and we've never called the virus a hoax. It's like, oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax.
I'm not afraid of the coronavirus, and no one else should be that afraid either.
I am responsible for transmitting accurate messaging and information.
I was pretty calm before all this, but then I got a little less calm when people told me to stay calm.
And the hate is boiling over.
Democrats and their media minions are even trying to blame President Trump for the global coronavirus.
Anything to attack President Trump. It's the Trump virus. What are you talking about?
You mean
Barack Ebola? He's imported Ebola into America.
I look at Ebola as a medical terrorist.
There's no reason to panic at all.
There's tons of hyperbole and speculation, none of which is helpful at all.
The entire problem we're having is due to panic, not the virus.
Ebola fear is spreading across the nation.
It's scary. This Ebola crisis and this Ebola scare.
You think America could be overwhelmed with Ebola?
Absolutely.
Are we freaking out too much?
Most
Most people who have it have just mild symptoms.
Correct.
They're just sitting at home eating soup.
They have contained this thing. Let's everybody get about your business.
It's a disaster. And there's panic all over the country.
The president needs more help, and the public's worried that the government can't handle the Ebola crisis.
Watch the Democrats, watch the media. You start to feel like they're rooting for coronavirus to spread.
If you want Trump to fail, then you're scum. Because if Trump fails,
people die. The panic isn't about the disease. The panic is about the leadership.
The president said that this disease wouldn't make it here. Well, then it did. And then when it got here, it wasn't going to spread. Well, now it has.
I think very few people trust our government as being competent. And it's all really starts at the top. It starts with Obama.
I think the president has been projecting calm. He's been very cool.
Do I want my president running around screaming like, we're all gonna die? No, I love that he was like, we're gonna be okay.
Are we all just panicking about this? Should we just chill out and not worry about it?
I'm just sick of a government that I'm paying for telling me not to worry and just trust them.
I think the President of the United States, by his lackadaisical attitude, is responsible if there is any hysteria.
There is no need to panic like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want you to do.
Anyone who is exacerbating the unease that the American people feel, shame on them, reject them.
This is so insane, and I'm so angry now, and I'm blaming it on the president.
Those morons at the CDC, those morons in the White House.
We are taking this very seriously at the highest levels of government.
I don't know how reassuring that is, that the highest levels of government are taking this really seriously.
You think this is far worse than the government is telling us?
Either they're lying, Sean, or they're grossly incompetent.
Obama's incompetency, his administration's incompetency, is really shining bright in this one.
The level of derangement is off the charts.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president.
It's like the Russia hoax. It's like the Ukrainian hoax. This is another hoax.
Sowing fear, panic, distrust. I was watching Anthony Fauci this weekend. I felt like he was a political hack.
Tony Fauci, one of the heroes in the battle against AIDS.
Absolutely.
Tony Fauci, terrific.
Ebola response coordinator Ron Klain.
Not a health professional. Look at the people who our taxpayer dollars are already paying, actual physicians whose jobs you might think it would be.
Vice President Pence is an inspired choice to lead this effort.
It could be a month from now, we're not even talking about coronavirus.
We all love golf. There are times to play and there are times that you can't play. And it sends the wrong.
So I'm curious because I want to do a fair comparison here. Obviously, Fox was a lot more concerned with Ebola than COVID. 531,766 deaths in America due to COVID. Maybe I forgot. So let's check this out. How many people died in the Ebola outbreak in the United States? Two. Two people. But Obama wasn't taking that seriously enough. People everywhere need to be terrified of an Ebola outbreak in the country. But 531,000 people dying, that's responsibility. Smite Night, I swear the constant comparison to H1N1 by Trump and other conservatives was the dumbest strategy I've seen in a while. Exactly. And that was one of the things that inspired me to start doing this stream, to be honest with you. I saw people jumping into, or rather jumping onto, the most ridiculous comparisons. H1N1 wasn't as communicable, didn't spread as easily. And we were well ahead of the curve on that one. Also wasn't as deadly. Ebola, 2 in the United States. It's just disingenuous fantasy land. Reality doesn't matter let me find an excuse to keep supporting my team at this point. And if we can't get back to discussing reality and facts with each other and talking to each other and solving very real problems, we're really going to struggle as a country. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now. This was under Trump. Under Trump, we were getting about 900,000 at its highest point, people vaccinated a day. We're up to almost 3 million now. 2,900,000 was the last count I saw. Biden's doing 3 times better than President Trump. From the New York Times, why the distribution of the vaccine was taking longer than expected. Health officials and hospitals are struggling with a lack of resources. In Florida, this is from December 31st, under the previous administration, less than 1/4 of delivered coronavirus vaccines have been used, even as older people sat in lawn chairs all night waiting for their shots. In California, doctors are worried whether there will be enough hospital staff members to administer vaccines and tend to the swelling number of COVID patients. This is why President Biden, on his first days in office, started setting up COVID vaccination facilities, signing executive orders to that extent. This is why President Biden, as part of this American Recovery Act plan, or Recovery Plan Act, sent so much money to state and local government officials. Because if the vaccines are sitting in a refrigerator and not getting into people's arms, because you don't have enough people to administer the shots, they're not doing any good. It's all well and good to produce enough vaccines for every American, but you've got to get the shot into somebody's arm before it does what it's supposed to do. I don't know how anybody, any reasonable person, can look at the COVID response and the actions we took under President Trump and say that those were acceptable. Left, right, center, if you honestly look at the facts, I don't see how anybody claims that it's okay. But that's where we are. $500,000 dead Americans. From the CDC itself, daily trends in number of COVID-19 cases in the United States of America reported to the CDC. From the beginning, January 27th, January 22nd of 2020, 7-day moving average, March 26th, July 25th. There seems to be a massive downswing right about here. This seems to be where we start dropping down. January 13th. When was the inauguration again? January the 6th? Yeah. That almost seems like January the 6th, 7th, and 8th was kind of a high point. 14th, 22nd, February 2nd, February 25th, March 11th. It almost seems to me that elections do indeed have consequences. That leadership from a federal level, that taking a global pandemic seriously when it's killing your citizens makes a difference. It seems like not only producing vaccines, but helping get those vaccines into the arms of those citizens so they're safe makes a difference. It seems like instead of calling it a hoax perpetrated by your political opponents, instead of lying about it, actually engaging with reality has real life consequences. It also seems like ignoring reality, as we did for the better part of a year, had real life consequences as well. This curve this will be Donald Trump's legacy. This and the insurrection in the Capitol. The Capitol being looted because of a riot that he incited on a date that he set, caused by a lie that he spread. This and the curve we're looking at right now with the number of COVID cases in this country will be the legacy of former President Donald Trump. It's not going to be his outrage about cancel culture. It's not going to be his bashing of the media. It'll be these two things. Even the Russia investigation will probably ultimately be lost in the mix, although it shouldn't be. It'll be the fact. It will be the fact that 531,000 Americans died on his watch. And that his response was directly responsible. That his failure to respond led to a large number of those deaths. That his failure to engage with reality and instead live in his own little fantasy land caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of American citizens. And this is the theme of Donald Trump's presidency. He would rather live in his own fantasy world. You know, the one where election fraud happened and he really won the election. That's a fantasy. That's why it failed in court so many times. And that fantasy is what led to the insurrection in the United States Capitol building to overturn constitutionally mandated federal elections that he, in reality, lost. In his fantasy land, COVID was no big deal. In his fantasy land, COVID would just go away. In his fantasy, COVID was a hoax created by his Democratic political opponents. In reality, it killed 500,000 American citizens. We can no longer regardless of your political beliefs, we as a nation can no longer afford to engage in trying to live in a fantasy land. I don't care if reality hurts your feelings. I don't care if reality exposes your lies. I don't care if reality is politically inconvenient to you. I don't care if reality might cost you a political election. I don't care if reality might make you have to learn a new job. I don't care if reality might make you question your political beliefs. I can't compromise with fantasies, and I'm done entertaining them. COVID was real. Trump lost the election. Climate change is decided science. Trickle-down economics does not work. America is one of the few Western democratic countries that does not have universal health care. All the other countries pay less per person and live longer on average per person. It's cheaper and it works better. You have a constitutional right to vote. I don't care what excuses Republicans want to come up with to try to remove people's constitutional rights to vote, but all Americans over the age of 18 have a constitutional right to vote. You have a constitutional right to a fair and public trial. Police don't get to execute you on the streets. I am done engaging with your fantasies. Bring evidence or go away. Woody2K, no one has ever tried to remove that right. Which right are you referring to specifically? Because I touched on several. And welcome. Thank you for coming back. I appreciate it. Voting rights. That stream chat log will catch up in a minute. Twitch apparently is having issues. You're demonstrably incorrect. Republicans right now are instituting all kinds of voter suppression laws. Specifically within the last few years, we had Republicans in North Carolina have their gerrymandering struck down because it was so obviously racially biased. I said this before. I just want all the election fraud conspiracy theorists to just admit, I believe all the Democrat votes were illegitimate. We should only count Republican votes. Say it with your chest. That's pretty much what was advocated at Smite Night. I think a lot of the voter suppression stuff specifically boils back to, we know if we make it harder for people to vote, less people will vote, and when less people vote, Republicans tend to win. And Witty2K, just to give you a more concrete example, felons in this country, in a lot of states, cannot vote. They're still American citizens. They're such a small minority of American citizens that I see no reason to remove their right to vote. I can see a lot of reasons that they should be able to vote. If one party gains massive political power and starts arresting its political opponents, all of a sudden you've got an entire party of people that can't vote anymore. Woody2K, what are my thoughts on voter ID? I think it's a solution to a problem that does not exist or that nobody can demonstrate exists. Voter fraud historically in this country is at 0.0000025%. 4 zeros and a 25. If you and I walk to the voting polls together, you and me just walk down the street to Las Vegas to cast our vote, it is more likely that I'm going to get struck by lightning on the way than it is that I'm going to cast a fake ballot. Literally, more likely that I'll be struck by lightning than cast a fake ballot. I also see voter IDs being used specifically to take away the voting rights of a lot of racial minorities. In North Carolina specifically, the suit I was referring to in the Supreme Court, the Republican administration requested data on what types of ID that minority, in North Carolina I'm referring to black people, that minorities used to vote. And then they made those forms of ID not acceptable as a form of voter ID anymore. They also found out who tended to early vote and on what days they tended to vote. And they wanted to close access to voting on those days and restrict access to early voting, because they found out that racial minorities tended to vote higher percentage-wise. Smite Night, are they felons really such a minority, though? At least we're at least talking about millions of citizens. Depending on the state you go to, but yes, typically they're a small minority, because you have to remember felons' right to vote isn't restricted nationally; it's state by state. To further expound on voter ID for you, Witty2K, if you could prove that voter fraud was actually a major, massive issue, like all over the place, right? That the current system wasn't working, and then you could find a way before it was instituted to provide every American easy ridiculously easy access to that ID card. And I mean, like, you're going to have to damn near go door to door because you're talking about, you know, a constitutional right that you want to restrict access to. A fundamental constitutional right. And then it was something that you couldn't take away from everybody, or anybody rather. And if they lost it, the process to get another one was like damn near immediate. So if somebody went to go, you know, check at the polling booth and realized that, you know, 6 months ago their ID had fallen out of their wallet, they could get like another one right then and there. Maybe you could get me on board with some form of voter ID at that point. But again, historically, I don't see voter fraud as a problem. Current system seems to be working just fine. I don't know how you get a whole lot better than, you know, 0.00025%. I don't see us building lightning rods everywhere to make sure that voters are safe on their way to the polls and, you know, get to cast their vote instead of getting struck by lightning. So I don't see a need for voter ID. And I've seen it abused constantly. For those of y'all wondering where the source is, you can go to the brennancenter.org. This is specific to mail-in ballots. While mail ballots are more susceptible to fraud than in-person voting, it is still more likely for an American to be struck by lightning than to commit mail-in voting fraud. And you have to remember, as I mentioned, and as this Senate states clearly, that mail-in voting fraud is more likely than in person. So I'm more likely to be struck by lightning than I am to dump a fake ballot into a mailbox. I don't think I'll find the right button eventually. I swear I'll get this down. I don't think that's a problem that I really need to worry about addressing. I just really don't. Does that answer your question, Whitty? And do you have any further questions, responses, replies? All right. Well, I guess that's going to wrap up our episode for today. Everybody, thank you for joining us. I apologize for the internet issues that we had today. We'll get that ironed out. Hope to see you next week. And again, if you ever agree, disagree, whatever the case is, the number is toll free and you are more than welcome to call in anytime you so choose. Hope to see you all next week and thank you again. Have a good one. The time for silence is over.
Bye-bye, Donnie, your time is up, so you can take your lies and you can go get fucked. The people spoke and they spoke by mail, so pack your shit, cause it's time to bail. Sorry, buddy, but you lost it, mate, and like everything true, you'll call it fake. But who'd have thought you'd be such a wussy when America grabbed you by the pussy and threw you out after just one term, cause they finally realised that you're a germ. And COVID's not the only thing you spread, like lies, fear, hate, confusion and dread. And you told your own voters not to vote by mail in a global pandemic, and that was your fail. So shut up, Donnie, and practice what you preach. Have some dignity and give your concession speech. Just tell everyone it's a conspiracy. Blame your fall on American democracy. Make up excuses and a million reasons from your shitty press conference at the Four Seasons. Get out there and go tell more lies. Do what you do best and propagandize. No one's expecting you to be apologetic, but let me explain it using your logic. See, you find more COVID when you do more tests, and you find more results when more votes get read. It's crazy, but that's how counting works. I can show you if you want to share your tax returns. You'll be fine, old mate. You survived impeachment. You survived coronavirus by injecting disinfectant. You've had 6 bankruptcies and 2 divorces, 200 days of tax paid golf and golf courses. You survived the guilt of putting kids in cages and 26 sexual misconduct accusations. You've only got like 4,000 active lawsuits, so man up, Donnie, and hang up the boots. Fake news, fake hair, fake tan, fake smiles, fake offshore accounts in the Cayman Isles. You're a fake president with a fake first lady who's gonna take half of your fake ass money. And you finally succeeded in building your wall around the White House, and it's 10 feet tall. For someone who hates lockdown as much as you do, you were quick to lock yourself down in there, dude. Fake friends who used you to climb the ladder, and fake everything else that no longer matters. Fake supporters who piss on homeless people. You're the sworn enemy of the American eagle, cause you tried to fool the world with no regret, and you're in $900 million debt. On the down low, if you know what I mean, like your old mate, Jeffrey Epstein. Nah, you'll be fine, you've told 20,000 lies and 230,000 people have died, just like Daddy's money gave you your start. Daddy Bannon will give you a job at Breitbart, cause no one believes your bullshit ruse, cause you're doing what you said you'd do when you lose. So see ya, buddy, you gave it a crack, and now even Fox News hasn't got your back. So sorry, old chum, but you're out of tricks, and you can suck 75 million dicks. The people voted someone else was hired, so sorry to say it, cunt, but you're fired.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition.